This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening and welcome everyone. I really apologise for all the technical difficulties that we had earlier. Had a real nightmare with my headset and I've had to swap to my son's ones, but all systems go. Thank you very much to the fantastic TTR team. So you are listening finally to The Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio.
And you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So I am Finola Jackson and it's really great to have you along. Thank you for bearing with me. So we are a little bit late starting and I do apologise for that. But we will be live until 9:30 and thank you so much for tuning in.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at TT Radio.
Well, that would be the shortest show on history, wouldn't it? So I don't think we want that jingle coming on right now. You can tell it's the first show of the academic year and I'm still trying to get into the swing of it a little bit, so please bear with me. And I'm just looking to see if my guest is joining. So hopefully she will be joining shortly. But yes, so welcome to my very first show of the academic year. I'm going to be hosting the first Sunday of the month and I'm really excited to be doing this, and I've lined up some fantastic guests for you. And I really can't believe that it's September already, and it's no surprise that just as we're all about to return to school, the sun has finally made an appearance. I hope you've all enjoyed it to the full this weekend. And yes, in true British fashion, we toiled through exceptionally hot weather, didn't we, in June? My second son was knee-deep in GCSEs during the heat wave. And then during August, when we're all off, it's wet, cold and miserable. So I will be moving to a new school and starting my first headship tomorrow. And I'm really excited for this. I was amazed when I found out that my new school has air conditioning. In my experience, don't know about you, but certainly primary schools have two distinct zones, and you're either in the Baltic or you're in the Arctic. And the jury is out about which is more bearable. But having seen the incredible forecast for this week, suddenly I'm feeling very thankful for the air conditioning unit. And my heart goes out to all the schools affected by this concrete nightmare at the moment. As you'll be aware, and you'll have heard it on the news, more than 150 schools were told only last week, days before they were due to reopen, that they would have to close because of this unstable reinforced material, often described, I believe, as aerobar concrete, and there's a real risk of collapse. And I read this morning that this concrete, along with asbestos, was used widely in the post-war building boom. But this particular type of concrete only has a 30-year lifespan. It really is the stuff of nightmares, isn't it? And hats off to all the school leaders and all the teachers who are in the throes of emergency planning and who are just calmly and wisely making these contingency plans to still operate in children's centres, porter cabins, even office blocks, and return to the dreaded virtual learning. So this backdrop makes tonight's session perhaps even more meaningful. And I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Maria O'Neill. And we are going to be chatting about how schools can be oases of hope, love, and havens of safety. Now, Maria is the author of a very highly rated book, Proactive Pastoral Care. I have thoroughly enjoyed reading this over the summer break. And it's a wonderful insight into nurturing happy, healthy and successful learners. So welcome, Maria. Thank you so much for joining us on a Sunday evening. And perhaps we could start by you introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what inspired you to become so passionate about pastoral work.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure being here tonight. So, a little bit about myself. I think I'm starting the third year in education this year. I had quite a busy career, did all sorts of things, going from academic to pastoral, from pastoral to academic. What makes me passionate about pastoral care? I think it's the personal experiences as well as everything that I have done around pastoral care, the research, the work with the colleagues. um, I have got two children of my own, and I have seen how schools do it brilliantly, and I have seen how schools don't get it quite right, and what effect it has on the young person. So, yes, very much a personal and professional interest in pastoral care, and with the research hat on as well, the academic interest to add to this too as well.
Yeah, it's great you're sharing your personal experience as well as a mother, and I'm sure many of our listeners can really relate to that. And it's hard, isn't it, as a mum, and you're trying to sort of keep your emotions in check, but you're seeing the direct impact of perhaps less than adequate pastoral care, and that can be a real challenge, can't it? And having those opening up those professional dialogues, and you're really hoping then that there's a really good parent partnership, so that the school's valuing your passion, but also your expertise, your wisdom, your experience, and all that you can see as a mum.
I think, but that engagement and involvement is very important. We have got to get the parents on board in terms of pastoral care. However, all the research and my personal experience points to the fact that actually parents are more engaged when it comes to academic. But the problem is, academic is not possible without the pastoral bit, because when we're talking about behavior, whether it's for learning or just general behavior, it is pastoral, because we have got to take into account where these students come from and what they have experienced. I had to teach a student who had just been to the family court, and you can't just ignore the fact that that has just happened. So there is a lot of talk about engaging parents, and I think we have got to distinguish between involvement and engagement. And with involvement, it is really easy to measure, because how many parents attended the evening, how many parents opened their inboxes to read the email, that is measurable. But how can you measure the actual engagement? How many parents actually did not just tell their kids to put the phones away for the night, but actually made sure that they did do that? We can't get into that personal life of families, so it is really difficult to measure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, all really excellent points, isn't it? And as a mum of four myself, it's it can be a huge battle, and you need a lot of energy and commitment, don't you, to sort of really following through those guidelines as well, and make sure that you're not just paying lip service and saying things, but then you're actually checking, aren't you? And then, as you're saying, having that dialogue with schools, and schools really do have that responsibility, don't they, to get that engagement right, and really reach out in the right way to parents as well, because it can be quite trying, can't it, for parents, especially if they've had a bad experience of school themselves, and they might be feeling a bit defensive or a bit got at, and it can all get quite tricky quite quickly, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. And we go back to the topic of relationships. How do we form our relationships with parents? What information do we give to them? Are we being proactive, or are we just, issuing detentions or sanctions, and we're just informing the parents? How many instances of positive communication or preventative communication have we had, other than just the reactive ones? And that's all, goes to, to show when we see it, whether parents really engage and get involved, or whether they do pay lip service to what the school does.
Absolutely. And I'm suddenly conscious that we've been talking for quite a while about pastoral care, but we haven't really explored a definition, have we? And I know that, perhaps listeners in America may be thinking of pastoral perhaps with a religious context. They might be picturing a Christian minister. So could you, from your research, perhaps share a recognised definition, of an accepted definition of pastoral care for us?
I've read so many different books, and no one can really give that definitive definition of what pastoral care is. And that's why it's so important for every single school to define it in their own way that is close to their community. For me, pastoral care is what we do to make students flourish and to make sure that they do achieve the best that they can. And it's that holistic sense of education that I have in mind when I'm talking about pastoral care. In terms of pastoral care and where it comes from, for me, it's rooted into the notion of well-being, and partly it's really difficult to define pastoral care because no one really managed to define well-being and what well-being is. For me, and based on the research that I have done, well-being has got 5 different areas. So for me, well-being is, of course, the physical, the mental, but then there is the emotional and the social, and also some people call it transpersonal, which is fair enough, but I don't think this terminology will relate to pupils or staff, so I call it moral growth or spiritual growth. And also within that growth, we have got the academic growth and we have got the skills growth as well. So that again complicates things a little bit. So for me, those 5 are the 5 pillars of pastoral care and of well-being.
Excellent. I've never heard that before, the 5 pillars of pastoral care, but I love that. I'm definitely going to be delving a little bit deeper into that for my own professional development and knowledge. So thank you so much for that, Maria. And I think we're going to move to the news now, and let's hear what's going on in the educational world. But stay tuned and we will be right back.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
A wide range of media outlets have covered the ongoing issue of reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, or RAC, and its use in buildings, including schools, leading to concerns around safety. The BBC reports that buildings at 52 schools in England were at risk of sudden collapse due to dangerous concrete. While safety measures have since been put in place at these schools because the situation was deemed critical, more than 100 others have also now been told to close areas with the concrete. These buildings were previously thought to be at less risk. The new guidance follows the collapse of a beam that was thought to be safe. Head teachers are now making alternative plans just days before the start of the new academic year. Some pupils have been told they will be learning remotely, whilst others are being housed in temporary classrooms or even at other schools. The total number of confirmed schools affected in England is 156. The news has since triggered concerns in all 3 of the home nations. The Scottish Government said it was trying to establish how many schools contain RAC, whilst in Wales investigations continue, although there have been no reports at present. The Northern Ireland DfE said schools were being checked as a matter of urgency. Ministers in England have been facing media and having struggled to keep up with a range of questions being asked, including how fixing the issues caused by RAC will be paid for. Opposition MPs have pointed out that schools themselves already have issues with funding and that local authorities have seen cuts in recent years, so finances may not be there at a local level. The DFE has also faced criticism for not publishing a list of schools affected, although it defended its actions, saying parents should hear direct from the school itself, at least at first. A school in Southend, which caters for pupils with physical and learning difficulties, has contacted the BBC to outline the significant challenges it is facing, as the closure of its main building means staff and pupils cannot access essential special equipment. Whatever the outcome, it is certain that, for some pupils, this is the start of yet another unusual school year. Away from issues with buildings, Schools Week reports on plans to ensure all schools in England hold electronic registers which the Education Secretary will have direct access to. However, proposals to introduce thresholds at which penalty notices must be considered for unauthorised absences are paused. They were part of the currently shelved New Schools Bill. New rules are not expected to come into force until 2024. But it has been made clear that ministers see attendance as an area which must improve. More than half of parents who responded to the consultation on the plans for e-registers disagreed due to the possible punitive use of the data collected. Officials said it would be used to enable better early intervention. 92% of local authority workers and 85% of school staff who responded support the plan. The DFE will move forward with changes to simplify recording of attendance or absence. In total, 22.3% of pupils missed more than 1 in 10 sessions in the 2022 to 2023 academic year. This is compared to 22.5% in the year 21 to 22, despite significant government intervention. Prior to the pandemic, these rates sat between 10 and 13%. The TES reports that a group of watchdogs, including Ofsted, are jointly to carry out targeted inspections in schools where there is a risk of pupils being exposed to serious violence or exploitation. The inspections happen in 6 unnamed local authorities and examine how police, social services and health services tackle serious youth violence. The focus will be on multi-agency interventions and could include interventions in schools, parks, shopping centres, or specific streets where young people may be at risk. The team will include representatives from Ofsted, the Care Quality Commission, HMI of Constabulary, HMI of Probation Services, and each team will be led by an Ofsted Health and Social Care Inspector. Where a school is involved, they will be asked to show they have effective systems to identify children at risk of or subject to serious youth violence and children who are missing from school. The inspections will end in May next year. Full details of the report can be found on TES online. Finally, The Guardian reports that Lego is to begin selling bricks coded with Braille to help blind and partially sighted children learn to read the touch-based alphabet. The Danish makers of the bricks have made specialist versions tested and developed by blind organisations across the globe. The bricks have been sent to a selection of schools free of charge since 2020, but now they will be available more widely. LEGO hopes the initiative will help parents, siblings and others share in learning Braille, and to encourage play interactions between sighted children and visually impaired friends. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Okay, so welcome back. I'm just thinking, Maria, there were so many pastoral issues in tonight's news bulletin, and it's just really, when I was listening to all those different segments there, and I'm just thinking that excellent pastoral care must have the power to be truly transformative. So why is it that not all schools are delivering on this? What are the barriers, do you think?
I think traditionally schools have always been regarded as academic establishments. I'm going back 20-something years ago when I first started. and we never had a DSL. We never had loads of things that we have got now. And it is, really correct and likely that schools reacted to what is happening in the world and that we started safeguarding young people. But if you look at the history of safeguarding as well, why did we have all those different legislations? Because something tragic has happened. So safeguarding has been always quite reactive in many respects. And that's what schools have become. Yes, we have said that we have got pastoral care, and I prefer pastoral support, and I'll tell you why. Because we all care about students, otherwise we wouldn't have been in the positions and the posts that we are in. But it's knowing what the child is, and it's about being proactive with that support. And in my experience, we have embraced all the changes, but we haven't really had the time to stop and think, well, how can we be proactive about all of this? Because a lot of schools that I visit, even nowadays, they're still very much reactive to what is happening. And this is just where we're at. There is, this are the circumstances, and that's why I have been, not pioneering because it's the wrong word, but I have been promoting being proactive about pastoral care. We weren't prepared for COVID, and we can see how it has affected, our students, our curriculum, our pastoral curriculum, and I'm just generalizing, hasn't been proactive enough to prepare young people for all the difficulties and the challenges and the changes that's happening in the world. So we have embraced pastoral care, but I don't think we have had enough time because, when you're in a school, it's an express train, but we haven't had that thinking time of saying we have got to be really, really proactive about our pastoral support or pastoral care.
Yeah, and if you have, I don't want to say a pastoral lead listening because pastoral is everyone's responsibility, isn't it, in schools? But just looking, and thinking about the news as well going on with the concrete and schools being closed and perhaps children being moved into unfamiliar buildings and perhaps just for part of the week, and then as you mentioned COVID, and then balancing the home learning as well. And it's hard not to be anything but reactive, isn't it? But are you saying we should really have learned the lessons from COVID, and perhaps we could be going into this nightmare that several schools across the UK are facing, but going into it a little bit differently? What advice would you give to listeners tonight who are worried about how to meet these extraordinary pastoral demands that we're going to be hit with over the next few weeks?
I'm just going to give you a brief example before I answer your question. That's a really good question. Thank you. When we were teaching e-safety, for example, before pre-COVID, we were always talking about having that balance, having the balance between the time in the real life and time online. What happened with COVID is that we put everything online, our children's interactions, our children's studies, everything has gone online. So our advice in many cases when we were talking about that balance between the real life and the digital world, well, wasn't quite appropriate during the time of COVID because we reacted and we put everything online. Now, what would have been, just looking back, what would have been the better way? The better way would have been to research what is going on, what are young people doing online, why they are attracted to the online world, manage their behavior, or help them to manage their behavior online, help them to really embrace the online world rather than having all those issues related to addiction and all the other things. So I think if we were to start with identity and who you are and how you react to different things and how to manage our emotions in the online world where the decisions are made really fast, it's a very fast paced environment. we would have been much better off. But obviously, that's just looking back and trying to learn from the lessons of COVID. Again, our pastoral curriculum needs to be proactive. We need to focus on raising self-awareness, self-understanding, self-compassion, self-love, whatever it is. But we really need to build up that resilience. It's a horrible, horrible situation. And, world is quite a challenging place right now with all the things happening, with so many families are in poverty, financial, difficulties. We have got the conflict going on. It's a really challenging world, and we have got to focus on ourselves and build that inner strength and inner resilience that we can cope with all the external circumstances. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And, it goes back to when we were discussing a title for this show and, really making schools that haven of safety and haven of love. And, we really do have a duty to do that, don't we? Because there are so many external challenges and difficulties, and, children and our young people are carrying a lot of worry. Their families are carrying a lot of worry. And, we've really got a duty more than ever, haven't we, to get this right? And as you said, stop being reactive and really start prioritising pastoral care and really being proactive with it is essential, isn't it? To have something that's going to be adequate and robust enough to meet the challenges.
Absolutely. I think in some respects, COVID helped to raise the status of pastoral care a little bit. But in the past, if I'm looking back, and again, I'm very much generalizing, but we did a little bit of a research, and it seemed that people didn't choose to go into pastoral care because with the academic progression, it was quite easy. There is a really simple, straightforward route for progression as such. Again, I'm simplifying here. But with pastoral care, how do you progress through pastoral care? In the past, we have done again a little bit more of research, and if you were to get to the very top, it's the academic stuff that was valued quite a lot. And academic would get you to the senior leadership, to the head teacher positions. Again, I have spoken to many teachers during that research project, and it turned out, again, I'm generalizing because we didn't have a large sample, but a lot of people were sort of pushed into pastoral because they couldn't progress academically. So we have got to really raise the profile of pastoral care, starting with the initial teacher training, starting with everything, because now the system has changed, schools have changed, and we need to instill that into the people coming into profession that pastoral care or support is part of the parcel, and we really have got to work on raising the status.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure many of our listeners tonight would be saying that, the pastoral side is, as important, if not more important than the academic. And, that should always be the case. And it isn't just something to be left to the lead. And as you said, when the problems hit, call on the pastoral lead. It should be the responsibility of everybody, shouldn't it? And it should be really valued at a whole school level. And I think that's, so important right now, as you were saying earlier. And do you feel that there's many schools that are just simply paying lip service to, having a pastoral team for the sake of it, putting something on their website, in the prospectus, but that's really, not good enough? Or do you think that schools, are in the main, and just to speak generally here, really seeing that the importance? Do you feel that we're heading in the right direction at least?
I think a lot of things have changed since I started back in, 20 something years ago. It definitely has changed, and we are moving in the right direction. But I think there are some obstacles to why schools maybe are ticking boxes when it comes to pastoral care. And there is no consensus. And to be fair, the guidelines from the government have been quite vague in terms of pastoral curriculum, in terms of the topics, and especially not even the topics, but how to deliver. That's why we had all the different things coming out in terms of, oh, we did it this way, we did it that way. So the students are not getting consistency. And that's, for me, that consistency across the board is very, very important. So it would have been an ideal world, absolutely fantastic to have the guidelines in terms of, and the knowledge, because what I find, you know, people don't necessarily have the right training and they don't have the knowledge to deliver materials in the way that they should be delivered. I'm talking about PSHC, but the reason why I'm talking about PSHC is that it's the starting point. Then whatever happens in PSHC should be picked up throughout the school, because, as you said, pastoral support or pastoral care is everybody's responsibility. We can't tell the child, well, you can't speak to this member of staff because they're trained, but no, this member of staff is not trained, you can't talk to them. It's about connection. And sometimes students won't connect to the people who are in pastoral roles. They might connect to their tutor, and tutors haven't had enough training, in my opinion. Just, with looking across the board, schools have been brilliant. Some schools haven't done that yet. And it's so important. And it starts from which actually knowledge are we going to deliver? And that's very, very important. And there are so many experts and organizations. And if you probably look in your inbox, there are loads of people saying, we can do this for you, we can do that. But in my view, you have to have the knowledge of your context, because no trainer, no expert would have that knowledge. You will have the knowledge of your expert, and, well, the expert knowledge, and you need another expert who has got understanding of the well-being, of mental health, to tell you, this is what's happening. Do you think you can apply that in your context? And what about this? So I'm talking more coaching style, because we have got to appreciate that every context is unique. And even the rest two schools close together, the atmosphere, the everything will be different, because you will have different students and different staff. So for me, it's that consistency. I'm going back to that. It's consistency coming from the government. It's consistency coming from the schools in terms of delivering everything. So that is my answer, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's really good food for thought, Maria. Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned emotional, mental health and well-being, because, it has been a really challenging few years universally, hasn't it? With so many unexpected changes and new ways of thinking, and, a stressful time for whole school communities. And at times it has felt relentless. And the pandemic certainly brought home an uncomfortable reality that this is a continuum, a line, and we can all be pushed up and down it. And now with issues with schools having to close again or rethink their provision, and children faced with makeshift classrooms, and it's the uncertainty that's the killer, isn't it? And just this not quite knowing what's ahead, and really supporting children and young people, and really sort of empowering them with, that it will be okay, and some coping mechanisms, and not with a false, just smile through it and grit your teeth and get through it, but really giving children that sense of life is full of ups and downs, and we're going to give you some strategies because that's the reality. And going back to sort of well-being, how would you describe well-being, and perhaps what advice would you give schools about well-being CPD? Because so often, in my experience, it can often be met with groans and a distinct lack of enthusiasm. And, surely school leadership teams really need to be supermodels and well-being supermodels. And I don't mean that glibly, but really actively demonstrating this and really having a robust CPD package that, as you said, it's okay if a student warms to somebody, but they might not have the knowledge and the expertise. So how can schools really get their well-being CPD and well-being provision spot on?
So for me, it's very important to define well-being, because if the school hasn't got a definition that everybody understands, from caretakers to the head teacher, it's not going to work. So the first step I would take is to define what is well-being, what are we already doing. So I mentioned the 5 pillars of well-being before, which is mental health, which is physical health, emotional health, social, and the growth. You have got the spiritual growth, you have got, or just the moral growth, the academic cognitive development, and the skills development. So the first thing is, under those headlines, under those pillars, I call them, the schools are already doing quite a lot. So it's taking stock of what you're already doing, what you already have got in place. And if there is some bits missing, that's where your CPD is aiming to, well, it's aiming to close those gaps. Again, when we talk about evaluating pastoral care or pastoral support, how do you do that? Well, that structure gives you the system to evaluate your provision. So, for example, with the social well-being, and I mention that because social and emotional have been the most affected during the recent times. Okay, social well-being, what does that mean? It's the relationships of pupils with staff, it's the relationships of people between them, it's the relationships of pupils with their families. So what do we do? And the questions that need to be asked: are we doing enough to enough work on friendships? Are we teaching our pupils how to be friends? Are we teaching them about what it's like, about the friendship dynamics, about different roles and behaviors we take on in friendships? And the reason why I'm using the word behaviors, because whenever I do something on PSHC or pastoral care, I start with identity. And looking at identity, looking at self-understanding. So how do you behave in those relationships? Why do you behave? So again, how can you evaluate? You can look and see how many friendship incidents you have got. And that system really allows you to narrow down and monitor and evaluate and assess separate areas of pastoral care and of well-being. Because if you're saying, oh yes, and I have received those emails in my inbox, we come over and evaluate well-being, really? People have been arguing for thousands and thousands of years, or thousands, hundreds of years, about well-being. How can you evaluate it? So it is really looking what is happening in your own context, and then that's the starting point for everything.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's great advice. Thank you so much. And, I think there's a plethora, isn't there, of promotional material that gets sent to schools offering these quick fixes. And, we can all see the temptation of buying into these. But why would you say that schools should be cautious? Because is doing something better than nothing, or what would be your response to that?
I think that sometimes when we go after quick fixes, we never fix the real stuff. And the problems that need to be fixed are left there. So even if the plaster can work for some time, when it comes off, we still have got some work to do. So for me, the way I look at CPD and the way I look at supporting schools, well, the most effective way of supporting schools is empowerment. Unless staff are empowered, unless staff feel the ownership, nothing is going to change. And that's for me the crucial bit, that ownership and empowerment. And the staff might not have the knowledge. If they don't have the knowledge, they can't empower pupils, they can't empower parents. So for me, the quick fix, sometimes it's just a quick fix. It just stays there. It's not solving anything. For me, I would say the most advisable thing would be to get someone who has the knowledge and who will support the school on their journey. That's why, in many respects, and it might be something that people will disagree with, but I don't believe in one-day courses, because when you go on a one-day course and you come back to school, with loads of ideas, you're back in the bubble. And very often, no matter how great the trainer was, no matter how great the course materials were, it's not sustainable. It doesn't lead to that long-term change. So, you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And, I've seen myself included in this. You go on a course, you're all fired up, you come back with a huge amount of enthusiasm. But as you were saying earlier, schools are 100 miles an hour. You soon get sort of distracted and in the thick of other things, and then you're not passing on that valuable knowledge. And so, in that sense, it can be wasted. Can't it? Which is such a shame. So I can see where you're coming from with these sort of one-off days, because you really do have to have a commitment to protecting some time to really share that, and also delve deeper and really get that understanding, because more often than not you've just scratched the surface, haven't you? So it's not going to result in some meaningful change. Maria, stay tuned, stay with us, and I hope our listeners are going to stay tuned, and we will be back very shortly.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
So, Maria, are you still with us?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. So I'm Finola Jackson, and for those that are perhaps just tuned in now or have gone for a cup of tea, you're listening to The Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio. Absolutely wonderful to have Maria O'Neill along, and we are talking about proactive pastoral care and really looking at what conditions are needed to nurture happy, healthy and successful learners, and really looking at the responsibility for schools to be these safe havens of hope and love and safety. And we're covering a lot of ground, aren't we, Maria? We're discussing a lot, which is brilliant. And I know lots that came out in your book as well. And we've just before that break there, we were talking about quick fixes and the temptation to send a member of staff onto a one-day course, but we've got to be cautious with this, and you've really got us thinking about the reasons why that isn't always the best idea and the best use of funds for schools. And I'd like to move on now, Maria, to the importance of building effective well-being partnerships. And well-being, like other areas we've discussed tonight, well-being something that's difficult to measure, isn't it? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
It is very difficult to measure, and there have been some measures that have been brought in by different IT companies, and they are great. However, my advice is always, and I am very much about school empowerment and using the school capacity, because schools are great establishments. They just need a little bit of time to stop, get off the express train and plan what is needed for them. So for me, the best way to look at well-being is start with the 5 areas that I mentioned before, and look at what is the problem, what does my concern data show me, or whatever platform you're using for recording safeguarding incidents. What are behavior problems? What are problems in terms of engagement? And once you have identified the problems, you know exactly what you want to find out. So it's just putting those questions in the questionnaire and sending it out to your audience, to your parents, to your pupils. And with that data, you can really see what is going on and what is needed in terms of moving forward together. So yes, always focus on your unique concept, on your unique environment, and measure what you have got by using your words, because people know their students and their parents the best, not the expert who comes from the outside and advises different things, but you know your community the best. So in order to know more, ask the questions, talk, have the focus groups. I know it all takes time, and some people say we don't have that time. That's fine, but instead of maybe spending finances on the external expert, give people a chance, free them up a little bit so they can do that work. It's very important to build capacity from within, because experts come and go, but you have got a strong, and I take into consideration the retention and recruitment, and people are leaving, but that's why it's everybody's responsibility, and it would be good for everybody to have that knowledge.
Oh, I think that's really insightful. I've been madly scribbling that phrase down, building capacity from within. And, I would argue that that's so relevant right across the board, because teachers feel so overwhelmed with the amount to do, and the workload can be ridiculous. And then sending people out on courses and getting these experts with long lists of what to do, which, as you said, aren't always relevant to your school's particular context or needs at that right time, or the pupils' needs. And so I think giving teachers time, don't underestimate the power of that, to really have those professional conversations, and also that thinking time. I mean, I'm very passionate about giving teachers time to read, because there's so much out there, and you really need some headspace to do that justice, and decide on what the priorities are, and then really say to teachers, this is how much we value this right now, because we are actually going to give you the time to do this part of your role properly, and that is so important. So I'm really pleased you talked about that, and I feel very inspired by that phrase, building capacity from within, and really using teachers' expertise as well, and not just always thinking I've got to get the external expert in, but really valuing the resource that you've got in school, and then giving that time, which is just valuable, isn't it? It really is valuable at the moment. I'm just thinking, Maria, something else that you looked at, well, something that you raised in your book that got me thinking over the summer when I read it, and I'm just coming back to the notes that I wrote, and you're talking about spiritual and moral goodness, and that sort of jumped out at the page, and I really wanted to sort of find out more. And this isn't really an area that's included in many schools' pastoral programs, but what have you learnt from your research in this area that you'd be happy to share with our listeners tonight?
I think it's really important to include this part of well-being into curriculum, because whether it's spiritual, whether it's someone who believes in God, or someone who has got strong religious views, they can develop and they grow, because all the religions will have certain standards in many respects, of how to lead your life and what a good life means, and what type of person you need to be, and that's that's really important to acknowledge, because I worked in schools where there were not many religious pupils, and I worked in schools where the majority of pupils were religious, and there was a multi-religious prayer room, and all of those things. So it all depends on the environment. But even if there are not many religious people, students, families, it doesn't really matter, because you still have got that growth as a person. It's about being a decent human being. So, how do you grow as a person? That's a very important issue, because, again, I'm going back to PSHC curriculum, because that's where pupils are taught about well-being and other things. And are we actually teaching them how to be a decent human being, and what does it mean to be a decent human being? And it's all about all those values that, again, I don't want them to be laminated and just somewhere in the corridors. Empathy, kindness, all those things, they do matter, but they've got to be put into action. Sometimes we teach values without giving students opportunity to put them into action, and that's where some of the schools do fall, in terms of their delivery, and not connecting all the dots in terms of, okay, we talked about values in PSHC curriculum, but what do we do as a school to allow pupils to practice those values? So yes, it's so important to ensure that we allow pupils to grow, personally, as a human being. And of course, there is the academic development and there is the skills development, which is great. But concentrating on the inner world, what makes me grow as a person, how I can develop myself. Because I haven't had that when I was a child in my school. Whoa, there was nothing like that at all. And it's only when I started teaching, I started looking at the self-development programs and how to be more assertive and how to do this. So for me, it was brand new, but I always wished, I wish I had something like this when I was growing up. Would have made much, well, yeah, many, well, yes, I wouldn't have made as many mistakes at all, at all. So I would have really loved to have something like that in school. But we have got an opportunity to give that to our pupils now that we know the importance of this.
Absolutely, and it's exciting, isn't it, sort of thinking about that. And I love that, how to be a decent human being, and there isn't a teacher or parent out there who wouldn't want that for their child. And yet, are we giving enough time to that in a school? And and what you said about values really resonates with me, because I think schools can have values, and they on the website and on the wall and laminated, but unless they're really underpinning and driving every aspect of school life, children aren't going to have enough exposure and enough experience and to really gain that understanding, that true understanding of them, and to really see the importance of those values. So I love that, and found that really fascinating part of your book. And I know you talked then about character education and how this shouldn't be restricted to the PSHE lesson. And again, I think character education perhaps needs a bit of discussion and defining as well, because I think that can be quite a confused term, can't it, in schools? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Has had some bad reviews and some good reviews, but it's not about character education. It's really about how schools implement it, because there are so many wonderful ideas, but some of them do fall during implementation period. It's how we implement things. For me, character education is everything. It's that development as a person, development of the moral compass, development of my values, or even being aware of my values and being aware of my character strengths. And again, you see, if you're aware of your character strengths, you love yourself just a little bit more. So it is, our responsibility to make people realize that they do have a lot of character strengths and we are all different. And the conversation changes when we talk from the point of strength rather than from the point of weakness. So it is changing the narrative. Now, character education, and that's, going back to ticking boxes. Very often the schools will say that, oh yes, we've covered that in PSHC, but that's not enough. That's what we called the lip service before. For me, character education is the commitment of staff to develop young people, and it could be for example, during PE lessons, what can we, develop? That resilience, the physical resilience, the discipline. We can develop loads of values and strengths throughout those lessons. What about drama, creativity? What a wonderful strength that is. Again, art. It's about developing that creativity and even the appreciation of beauty, which is a fantastic character strength to have. Through academic subjects, again, we can look at academic honesty, for example, or we could look at the same curiosity and getting pupils to research certain things. So, although we can talk about character education in PSHC, and we can look at the character strengths, and we can look during our careers lessons at the, employability skills, whatever they are, it's so important to have that message reinforced throughout all the different subjects, that we are developing that human being, a decent human being with all the strengths.
Absolutely. No, it's so important. And I was fascinated to read your recent blog on kindness, and I'm going to share a personal story here because I remember being given the kindness prize at the end of year 6 at primary school. And at the time, it didn't really seem as good as getting, say, the maths prize. And, well, let's be honest, I was never going to get that. But I was a bit embarrassed. It seemed a bit of a fluffy prize. And yet now, in my 40s, well, I've come across the best and worst of human behaviour and really believe that kindness is everything. And I have a degree, a master's under my belt, PGCE, and recently my NPQH. But I look back and you know what? I'm really proud of that kindness prize. And when I written end of year reports, kindness is a quality that I really love to highlight and to value. So I'm looking at my notes here and I picked out something from your blog, and I'm going to share it now with our listeners, that you can't reach your fullest capabilities of kindness without first being kinder to yourself. And I was wondering if you'd be so kind as to share and talk about the incident on the train with the phone call and how this got you thinking in a new way, if you'd be willing to do that, Maria.
Yes, of course. So, I wouldn't say I was in a dark place, but it was pretty grey down there. And I was on a train going to one of the schools to deliver the training, and it was early in the morning, and I was tired. I think I was at the stage where I have been kind to other people, I have been kind to pupils, have been kind to staff, but I was just worn out. And my friend phoned me because I didn't return their call the night before. So they were a bit worried about me, and they gave me a ring. And I probably sounded a little bit grumpy, like, oh, just leave me alone, I'm fine. And they were just, do you even love yourself? And that stuck with me. And I use that phrase with pupils a few times since then, because once an angry pupil has a confrontation with someone else, and it stops them straight away when I say, do you love yourself? And they never thought about it in that way. So I have used that kindness that my friend sort of gave me, and I do ask this question quite a lot because it is so important to be kind to yourself first and to accept yourself for who we are. And I noticed with pupils, especially since the lockdown, they don't like themselves. Their body image has suffered very many times. When I was delivering an online lesson and I was talking to the pupils, many girls will say, Mom, can we switch the camera off? I don't want to see myself on the screen. So it has affected so many areas of our young people's lives. And that incident on the train really, you can say those things to pupils, but you have got to feel them yourself. And I know what impact that had on me. So I'm carrying on the impact going.
Oh, thank you so much. No, that's lovely to share that. And I think, it's heartbreaking, isn't it, to hear that young people not liking themselves, not thinking that they come up to scratch, and, all these pressures from social media and this sort of perception of what they've got to look like, what they've got to wear, and it's really tough, isn't it? Being a young person right now for lots of reasons, as we've discussed, and that brings home that this pastoral work is absolutely crucial, isn't it? Because the challenges on young people right now are huge, monumental, and to be those real sort of kindness advocates and kindness champions, and really saying to people, just love yourself for who you are, and you don't have to fit a particular mold. It is absolutely imperative, and I think we're very lucky to have people like you leading the way with this, Maria, and really, really speaking out about it, because it is just so important. And and thinking about, because time is ticking along, but talking about social media and perceptions, and I know you often talk about thriving in a digital world, and sometimes I think, gosh, is that even possible, with all the challenges that represents? But I know you spoke to me recently about some recent research and how your own thinking has moved on and developed. And as we talked earlier, COVID has really transferred even more of our lives online and normalized this. So what are the challenges, and perhaps, thinking positively, opportunities ahead? And how can we thrive in a digital world?
I think there are, again, we need to approach the digital world from the definition of the well-being and the 5 areas of well-being. When it comes to the physical health, obviously the impact is negative. It's the eyes, headaches, feeling dizzy, all of those things that can happen to you if you're in front of the screen too much. In terms of the mental health, addiction is the most serious problem. And that's why it's so important to understand your thoughts, to self regulate. And, if parents can't self regulate and they are showing this example to young people, what chance have the young people got to self regulate? And to be fair, throughout my research, when I asked young people, what would they tell their parents? A lot of them said to get off their social media and spend some time with me. So again, and that's why parental engagement and involvement is so important. And for schools to have the knowledge to educate the parents. And again, throughout the research, when I was talking to the parents, one of the parents started saying, yeah, I have got healthy digital habits. As they have gone through the different questions, they said, no, I haven't got healthy digital habits. So again, it's the knowledge, but only really the school could push that knowledge onto the parents, because parents are not going to go out and try to learn about well-being and the digital well-being. Most people think of well-being as still physical and mental. Now, in terms of emotional health, digital world can have both positive and negative effects. And the negative is when there are so many layers of external validation in the digital world. It's the likes, it's the status in the game, whatever it is. And it can go both ways, because if you're successful, then it will be positive emotions. But if someone didn't like your post, or if something happened and it really knocks you down, or young people, and to be honest, adults as well. When it comes to a social, again, it's a huge area, and the WhatsApp groups of parents talking about schools, and I have dealt with a numerous, incidents arriving from the parental WhatsApp groups when parents name the children in those WhatsApp groups. So parents again need to be educated in terms of social well-being. And again, when I was talking to children, they said, I don't want my photos online. Mum shares too many things online. How do we establish those healthy boundaries and healthy relationships online? Because for some pupils, and I have looked at the pupils who might not succeed at school, but they succeed in that digital world, and they're a different person. Their behavior is different because they might not be accepted in the real class, in the real life, but they are accepted in their little gaming community or social community. And it could, give that connectivity, which is super important for teenagers when they start separating from families and parents. So yes, social well-being could be both positive and negative. When it comes to skills development, we don't often emphasize enough how important the digital world for skills development, because you can look how to bake, how to dance, you can look for recipes. And it's so important. Or so someone said to me, one of the pupils, oh, I just look for ideas and then I adapt them and make my own things. So the skills development, definitely positive impact. Academic development, it's that research, the curiosity, finding out things. But again, it received a quite negative feedback at times, because when teachers just ask students to research, that's not going to work. There need to be certain criteria during that research work for pupils to meet to be successful. um, and in terms of the spiritual and moral development, again, some people said to me, well, we're using those apps, those self-development apps, or, those prayer apps are really good. So we need to really look, how can we teach pupils about positives, and what structures can we put into place at school and at home to support them in terms of developing the positive skills, because it's not going to go away. We are talking about artificial intelligence, it's going to be more and more and more. So how can we really thoroughly prepare students for that life in the digital world? And it starts with them. It starts with understanding themselves, with self-regulation. It always comes down to you, because the most important relationship they will have is with themselves.
Absolutely. So it's so important, that self-regulation, isn't it? And and it's difficult to do perhaps when emotions are running high, and it's something that really does need to be taught and learned and practiced. And so interesting that you said about many young people saying, I just want my parents, carers to put their phone or iPad down and just spend some time with me. And I'm in primary education, that's certainly the case there. And I think often with teenagers, they might not say it, but they, that's how many are feeling. So it's so interesting, and I think it's getting that message out in the right way, with parental involvement, parental engagement, to get that really put across. Because as you said, I think a lot of adults think, oh no, I've got a very healthy relationship with devices and online habits. But then when they actually think about it, and they aren't worried about being judged, and they can be honest and are talking in a safe space, they realise that they haven't. So huge work to be done, because as you said, with AI and more challenges ahead, it really does need to be confronted, and schools have got a huge responsibility in this area. Maria, stay tuned and we will be right back.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
So Maria, just you're still there, aren't you?
Yep.
Sorry, I was just thinking, I was just looking through a few messages that we've had tonight, and there's a question posed by Lucy, who has asked about engaging parents, and she said, in your experience, Maria, what has worked particularly well? Are there any nuggets that you could share? I know we haven't got long, but anything that has worked well that perhaps might help some of our listeners tonight?
For me, working with parents is always about building relationships with parents. And how do you build relationships? It's that proactive communication. It's maybe running focus groups. Sometimes people don't volunteer in the end, but the fact that we actually offered and we wanted parental opinions, it did matter. So it is building relationships and making parents feel safe. That's what, in my experience, worked. And if they do feel safe, if there is that relationship of trust, it's much easier than to deal with more difficult situations and having difficult conversations when they, arise, and they inevitably will arise because things do happen. So it is building relationships, and I'm not just talking about soft relationships or whatever it is, but it's about those honest relationships, no sugarcoating, but making sure that parents understand that you always will put their child at the heart of decision making.
Absolutely. And I think, if parents are only hearing the negatives or the behaviour incidents, it's very hard, because defence barriers go up and they're not going to be able, with the best will in the world, to be receptive and to hear, no matter how well meaning the advice or the purpose of this particular conversation is, perhaps with a different member of staff who hasn't been reporting anything back negatively. But building those relationships so that the parents can really trust staff, and really, yes, that they do have my child's interests at heart, and they are coming at this with the right intention. So let's try this, let's work together, and I think that's absolutely invaluable advice. So thank you for that. And just thinking, we've just got a couple of minutes really left before we close, but thinking about the start of a new academic year now, isn't there, coming up? And I think the kindness message that came out, well, that's obviously key, isn't it? Going into a new term, we don't know what's been going on in everyone's summer holidays, and by having that kind approach, you perhaps could be the one thing that really helps reduce somebody else's pain by you being kind. So I think that's a great message to be going out with. But I just don't know if you've got any final words that you'd like to share with our listeners on any aspect that we've been talking about tonight, Maria.
I think think also being kind to ourselves as teachers, as leaders. And sometimes we start the new year with the best intentions and we are all ready to go after that, the Sunday night. And we are there and we are ready. But sometimes things don't work out, and that's fine. And if they don't work out, it's not the end of the world. So you just need to get up, be kind to yourself, and start again. So it's not final. We are on a journey. Parents are on a journey. Students are on a journey. And sometimes there is a bit of a diversion. There is sometimes a few bumps on the road, and that's absolutely fine as long as you're kind to each other and you're kind to yourself.
Well, Maria, do you know what? There was certainly a bit of a diversion, wasn't there, with the start of my show tonight? And you were incredibly kind and patient and stuck with me. And, only a small example, but it didn't go to plan at the start, but we kept in there. I had fantastic support, as always, from the Teachers Talk Radio team. And you have been absolutely wonderful. And those final words, I am going to be literally saying them to myself before my head hits the pillow tonight, because we're not robots, are we? And we're dealing with an awful lot on a daily basis, and that sort of real conviction that we can start again. We're on a journey, and if something goes wrong, we just pick ourselves up, we go again, and we are hopefully that little bit stronger and wiser from it. So everything is an opportunity to grow, isn't it? And we can't beat ourselves up, because in this education world we need to be strong, don't we, and tough. We've got a lot to deal with, and we're certainly going to need our energy. And sometimes the voice we use to ourselves is awful, isn't it? We wouldn't dream of using those words and saying that to other people, but to ourselves, sometimes anything goes. So I think that message to be kind to ourselves is absolutely brilliant. And I can't thank you enough. You've been a fantastic guest for my first show of the academic year, and you've left us with lots to think about, to reflect upon. I've been madly scribbling, so I will make some notes as well, put them in my journal, and refer back to that over the next term. So Maria, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson Edexcel's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs